So thanks everybody for coming. We appreciate that. We know that every week of every semester is busy, but we do know that this is advising for many faculty, so we appreciate you taking time to eat lunch and enjoy the conversation that we hope to have. We want this to be as interactive as possible, so if you get some questions that you want to ask throughout, feel free to do that. We do recognize that we probably have about 3 hours of material that we're going to squeeze into 50 minutes, but we try to cut it back down a little bit. So this is a passion and interest for both Chiquita and myself as far as the work we do as faculty members, but also just kind of the passion of who we are and the work that we do outside of the classroom, in the community, and et cetera. So when this topic came up through the civility response team, we both jumped at this because when we get to talk about these issues, while they're very serious, we enjoy talking about that and having people think through what you might be doing in the classroom or outside of the classroom, because what we're going to be talking about are incidents of incivility. And so this while we're focused on faculty in the classroom, it doesn't necessarily mean that these ideas can't be used any other place on campus. So we have 3 goals that we want to talk, and hopefully we'll get through during our presentation today. We want you to understand the value of setting expectations about civility in the classroom, and so part of that is thinking about the proactive approach that you do that, and then the reactive approach, because sometimes you have to react in the best of situations. We want to effectively address student behaviors that compromise healthy learning environments. The reason students are here is to learn, whether it's inside the classroom or outside the classroom, and it's important that we set the standards that learning can occur. If someone is feeling psychologically or physically threatened in the classroom or on the campus, their attention is elsewhere. So we want to create those safe environments, and when acts of incivility happen, that makes the students move away from that piece, which is the primary reason they're here. And finally, to provide a transformative learning experience for all of those involved by building trust and respect. And that's for those who are involved in those incidents. So we think we'll have some trust here, but this is really focused on when an incident occurs, how are we building that. So one of the first things we want to talk about in the proactive approach is one of the models that I use when I teach in the master's program is this whole idea by Kurt Levin, which talks about a change model. He's a social psychologist back in the 1930s. And what I want people to remember is that behavior that occurs is a function of the person and the environment. Okay, so that the person comes in with his or her previous experiences, but the environment that we create allow those behaviors to occur. And so they interact on a constant continual basis. And so people are bringing in experiences of racism, of sexism, of discrimination of all sorts into the classroom, maybe being bullied for different reasons. And so we recognize that the environment we create in the classroom has an impact on how students are going to act and interact with those other individuals in that classroom setting. One of the things that we talk about in environments is that if we don't explicitly talk about behaviors that will be tolerated and not tolerated, the social norm is accepted as the basis that we start, what we call like the null environment. So if it's okay to make jokes, racist jokes everywhere else, and one's made, and we assume that that's going to be okay, then people accept that as the norm, and I have to just deal with it. And so part of this, when we talk about these experiences, we want to think about the proactive environments that we explicitly say what is going to happen in our classrooms and what is not going to happen in our classroom. Because otherwise, people may have been in other environments where certain behaviors were tolerated and shouldn't be. And so with Kurt Levin's change model, he talks about unfreezing, changing, and refreezing, or sometimes just freezing. And what this does is unfreeze is saying, let's stop and look at behaviors that used to occur. What might trigger those and how do those play out? There's usually some kind of dissonance that comes from this change in environment. We look for those changes to say, here's the desired behavior that we want. And we're going to talk about some of those tools later on with regards to what is that desired state? Where do we want people to move? How do we encourage people to move in that direction? To use language that's inclusive, to respect other people, to listen carefully. And then ultimately, by supporting this change, we reinforce and anchor it so that that becomes the new norm. So we freeze or refreeze those behaviors to say, here's the new expectation. So when we get in that environment, and this can happen very fast, and it can happen very slow depending on the situations. So we wanted to give this background from before we started talking about some of the tools that we can do. The other piece that we talk about with, oh, you want to, go ahead.
Just one sec.
Yeah.
All right. So, in order to engage, what we have are 3 communication techniques that we're going to explore today. But one of the techniques requires that we have 4 volunteers. So before we do anything, I need 4 volunteers who will participate in a role play. Okay. One volunteer will be the professor, and there will be 3 students that will do a very simple exchange, each person having about 30 seconds or so to negotiate this exchange. So I need 4 people who are excited about participating today, who will raise their hands and receive this sheet of paper that I have in my hand, because you're going to participate in a role play in a little while. So where are those 4 hands? Come on.
Well, what's the heck?
Thank you, Kathy.
I'm retiring.
Yeah. It'll be fun. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Yeah, thank you. Okay, we have 4. Whoop, whoop.
How first? Tell me to read it then.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. So 1, 2, and 3, 4. I'll point out. Number 1, professor. Student 1. Student 2. Student 3. Good deal. All right.
That means more reading for me.
No, you got it. You got this, Captain. You have this. You'll do it. So, the 3 communication techniques that we're going to present. One is called the STAR approach, and these are all. I've developed these in the process of creating a help bridge training that I provide for high school students and middle school students and for some teachers. So these are techniques that have been provided in the Berkeley County and Jefferson County school system, and people are actually implementing these and using them now. So now we share them with our Shepherd family, and hopefully they will really be useful for you. The STAR approach is mostly for in-class conflict. The SAFE approach is for in-class or for one-on-one interaction, right? And then the I statements can be used anytime, any day for any of you. And the whole idea there is that you balance the dynamics of power during conversation. So you use certain statements in order to allow yourself to just be one with the person you're communicating with, instead of being the professor with the student or being the faculty member with the dean. You use certain statements to kind of balance the interaction and create more peace, in terms of what you're trying to relay. So those are the 3 techniques that we're going to talk about today. And thank you so much for volunteering for that role play. That was great.
We appreciate your vulnerability,
Yes,
not knowing
thank
exactly
you.
what we're asking you
Oh,
to
it's
do.
okay.
So
They know
thank you.
that it'll be fun.
So we wanted to give a kind of a precursor to where we're going. But part of this we want to talk about is a sense of belonging. And so ideally, when you think about environments, you want people to feel that they matter. We talk about this idea of mattering, and I know that when Heidi was seeing I'd written something and we talked about mattering, is that a language that we use? And it's about that communication piece. But we want students to matter. We want them to feel a sense of belonging. And we have to create those environments so students feel like they belong, that their words, when they share those words, that they will be heard. It is not saying that you have to agree, but it's that you will be heard. And so when we think about going back to Kurt Levin's model, how do we create that environment? And we're going to be talking about some of those pieces, but I wanted to give some basic understanding of a sense of belonging to say, does that sound right? Should we be creating this in the classroom? So one is it's a basic human need. Therese Strayhorn is the one who provides this information, but it's a basic human need. We all want to feel like we belong, that we matter. And we've all probably been in a situation where we've maybe felt, even though we're sitting on the inside, we feel like we're sitting on the outside. And that doesn't make us feel good. It also makes us not want to contribute, to talk, to share. So we want to create that. Fundamental motive, sufficient to drive human behavior. So a sense of belonging provides direction, provides motivation, encourage creativity. It gets heightened in importance, so in certain contexts, in certain times and in certain populations. So you want to create those environments so that they're actually more certain times. There are some meetings that we sit in that we don't want to participate in. We may feel like we belong, but we don't. That sense of belonging is not as heightened. And so we recognize that. There are others that we sit in, we would like to contribute, but we're never asked to. And so we feel less than. So we want to create those environments where heightened importance, and recognize when it's important to the individuals in your classroom. It's related to and a consequence of mattering, which I kind of highlighted earlier on. We want to matter. We want to feel that what we say is valued by others in the room. Again, it's not about agreement. It's about, I care what you say. I want to hear what you say. I want to hear what you have to say. It's affected by and intersects with social identities. And so this is an important piece when we think about civility issues, is that we have to reflect on our own privilege and our own biases around stereotypes that may say, I don't value the voices of some people. And is that unconscious or conscious? I don't value the voices of the women in the room as much as the men. I hear white people at a different rate than I do people of color. I interrupt. So we need to be aware that sense of belonging ties to social identities. If you have ever felt like you're the only in the room, you often don't feel like you belong. And you can define the only in any kind of identity that you might have. Sense of belonging engenders positive outcomes. So what we know is that if someone feels like they belong, they're going to contribute most. And the more ideas we have, the better product we're going to have at the end. And then finally, it must be a continued basis. You know, everybody's welcome, and then we don't do anything more, it becomes just words and has no real power and meaning to it. And so we need to recognize this, and it'll change. And when we talk about incidents of incivility, if we don't address those, sense of belonging goes away. Goes away. Especially if it's impacted by some kind of identity that they have, that individual has.
All right. So our first approach that we'll address now is called the STAR approach. And what is so important about the STAR approach is that it allows us to create a teachable moment in class. Have you ever had a circumstance to occur where you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this has happened, and you can feel the mood changing, you can feel the attitudes, like energy, you know. I always, am talking about with my friends and my colleagues, positive energy, coming here, feeling like I want to have a good day and leaving in that same way that I came, and then sharing good energy with the people around you. So if you're in touch with energy, you can feel in your classroom the moment where the energy changes. And you're just like, not only do the people in the class want to leave, but you might want to leave as well, And you're put in a situation where you have to figure out what in the world am I going to do to change or adjust this energy. So the STAR approach is an approach that can help us do that. There are 4 key ideas here. First, that there's a situation that occurs, and what we want to do here is that we want to actually describe what has happened. So a problem occurs in the classroom, and instead of just quickly trying to just, brush over it or, say something sarcastic or ignore, the idea that this has happened, you want the student to actually relive what has happened here. And you want to be the transformative faculty member who is able to revisit this and say, hey, look, it's time for us to create a teachable moment here. So we're not going to be stressed out by this negative energy. We're going to walk through this and talk through this situation and see what perhaps we can learn from what has happened. So that's how you perhaps waste class time. Some faculty members will look at this as, oh my goodness, I have so many things that I have to cover in this class, and now I'm wasting this time talking about this, but it's not. Because every experience is a learning experience, And so sometimes we have to take those moments in our classes to revision and to think about things and to make it a teachable moment. Then it's worth it. You know, the negative energy changes, you develop your relationships, hopefully with people, and then some of the other approaches that we'll talk about today, you can use those for one-on-one interactions with the students who perhaps caused an issue or something like that. But here's how it works. So number one, there's a situation, you want them to listen to it. Number two, there's a task or a challenge. And so not only do we want to revisit this scenario or this situation, we also want to let them know what kind of went wrong in the conversation. So, you know, where did we kind of fall off? What are some things that happened here that changed the energy in the classroom? Okay. Next, action. Learning through action and natural action. That means that your classroom is an organic space. It is an organic space. Now, some of us, we say, okay, we're going to have this lesson plan, and we're going to use this same lesson plan every semester. And do you really think that every class is going to be the same every semester just because you have this lesson plan? Absolutely not. Because the people who are in this classroom, they create energy, they create momentum. Some of us are extroverts or some of us are introverts. I know for me, I get energy from my students, and I try to give my students energy. So it's a give and take, you know, that occurs. But your classroom is organic in a way that you can use these techniques in order to act. So I told you before that there was a technique about I statements that we would talk about where we kind of balance, you know, the technique where you balance the power dynamics. That's where we'll use those in our STAR approach. And then last, we actually want to use our data and we want to use our knowledge to try to help the situation. So we are all here for a reason. And we have to be spontaneous in a way that we can use our fields of study and our knowledge that we've developed in those fields of study to spontaneously, on the spot, use that information in order to help somebody learn about something. So some of you teach math, some of you are English faculty, some of you are psychology, you know, in the sciences, etc. There's something about your field of study that you can use to create a teachable moment. There's some way that you can compare something in your field to this issue that has occurred. And I know you all know your fields of study so well that you can speak to a circumstance or a situation on the spot that relates to something. You just have to find it in you. But that is the creativity. That is the organic space within our fields where we have to know our information. That we go and we find a way to bring it right back to where we were, you know, in the class and in discussion. And I know we've had to do that all the time. That's when you become, I guess, the real teacher in the classroom because you know how to bring it right back, right? So we have to find a way to talk about whatever this challenge is and bring it right back to the subject where we left off. So you create a teachable moment. So this is the STAR approach.
So part of this, though, is that these incidents that will occur, most of those will be topics that you may be uncomfortable with or feel like you don't have knowledge about. And part of the issue is that we don't want you avoiding those. We want you to create those teachable moments. And it doesn't mean that you have to have all the knowledge around the issue that might happen. So if someone makes a racist comment, hopefully you recognize it's racist and you address it. Because it creates a hostile environment if you do not. It doesn't mean you have to have all the research and knowledge about racism or racist comments. It means that you can have conversations, which we're going to talk about, using I statements and the impact that it has on the classroom, not just the person that it was directed to, but everybody else. And I think that's where sometimes that I may stop, because it's like, can I facilitate this discussion? Do I have the skills to do that? And the answer is yes, we all have that. Because all we have to do is we need to say, how did that impact? How does that impact? Here's how it impacted me. Sharing those I statements that we come back to in order to begin that process. And so we often want to dismiss it or minimize it because we may feel that we're inadequate to facilitate it. And what we're trying to get at here is that you're not. And then you can tie it back. But some of these things, if we don't address these issues that we're going to talk about, is it creates a classroom or a particular environment that is less conducive to learning. And so part of this happens when we talk about microaggressions are everyday occurrences where people are making little statements that jab at people. So it could be tied to a stereotype, it could be directed at any kind of aspect of identity, but it's continuous. So you might make some comment about someone being Jewish and using some kind of stereotype, or being a woman. We were talking about this a little bit earlier today, this phrase, and I'll use it because it just kind of came up, this idea of resting bitch face. Has anybody heard that phrase before? Okay, so it's been around for a while in circles, and it's usually directed at women who are now kind of serious, usually thinking about things, but it's a derogatory phrase. If you're hearing that, that could be very offensive, and it should be offensive because what it's saying is that it's not directed at men. And so part of this is recognizing that that's a microaggression. You've got resting bitch face. Well, basically we've described a derogatory term about women to a woman. And microaggressions don't just usually happen once in a while. Usually they happen every day for individuals, and it could be different aspects of their identity. So when I teach this in the class, one of the things I like to talk about is how many people have been stung by a mosquito or a bee. I'm not talking about those who are allergic, but anyway, most people are stung. It hurts, right? But we deal with it. Can you imagine having a hive drop on you and having tons of bees sting you? People who are in minority statuses around race, sexual orientation, religion, get these microaggressions thrown at them all the time. And so we need to recognize that the classroom is one of those places where they could be thrown out inadvertently by the faculty member and or inadvertently or consciously by other students. And so what happens is when you hear this, you hide, you're invisible. You don't want to be seen physically because you don't want to be attacked. Again, that it's a feeling of being abnormal and not belonging. Becomes internalized. We internalize discrimination. I must have deserved that, so I still don't participate. And you can look at all of these from the psychological and the physical pieces to having to represent your gender, your sexual orientation, your religion, your race, and all of these. And then it really does lead to self-esteem issues, because if you're constantly being picked on and being attacked for parts of your identity that you cannot control, that's being minimized or diminished, it makes you feel less of a person. And so we recognize this as part of why we need to address these issues of incivility. And not all issues of incivility are directed around issues of identity, but a lot of times they are. So we want to make sure, because this is where most people are uncomfortable. Just generic bullying, people can deal with that. It's when I have to talk about race or sexual orientation that I get nervous and anxious. So, yeah.
So I have a question about the microaggressions in the classroom. I hear that a lot of it is verbal, but can it also be sometimes found in our texts and our literature and stuff?
Sure.
That we miss?
Sure. I mean, it can be forms of privilege that we don't even realize when we're reading. So part of this is looking at it and saying, like, if you're writing scenarios and you're always using European names, Sue and John, can you mix it up? So people don't see an identity there. They're like, okay, I'm not part of these word equations. I mean, that's a little something, but that's a big something as well. We need to remember that. It can be in the media. When we think about issues of media literacy, it's like, who do you see? And more importantly, who you do not see when we look at these issues. So when you're choosing slides and you're illustrating, what does the diversity look like in your PowerPoints, in your presentation? Are you even conscious of that when you're thinking about which slide you're going to pick? Or is it the easiest one? I Googled it and here's the first one. Are they all white people? Are they all women? How do we diversify that? So those things can play out as forms of microaggressions as well. And so they're in the written form. They're also verbal, and they can be visual, non-written forms as well. So, yeah, thank you.
All right, so now we get to engage our first communication technique. So I told you a little bit about the STAR approach. You had STAR, and it is on your handout so you can see it. Situation, task, action, and result. So the first is a situation, and to listen to the scenario, and I will say the scenario a little bit, but then we'll listen by having our team of phenomenal role players to exhibit this scenario or situation that will occur. So what happens, just for a little background in our role play, so that our role players know what you're doing here. The instructor defines a concept in a field of study that can be misunderstood sometimes. And then a student becomes offended and responds to the instructor for sharing that definition in class. The second student also disagrees with the definition, thinking that the concept is defined inaccurately by the professor. And then the third student, of course, is extremely frustrated with everyone and does not feel that they should be paying to hear this nonsense occur in the classroom. Can we see that happen in real life?
But I have to make up, well, I have to make it up.
You have.
I can just read this then.
You can read it with passion.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, so you want to take a few seconds, but this is our, the first element of our approach is to actually listen to what has happened. So we want to hear kind of what happens before we try to use the STAR approach to approach the situation. Are you
Well, I
ready?
didn't know if you wanted me to make something up out of my own classroom or this.
Oh, no,
Because
no,
I'm sitting here thinking of an example. Okay.
If you can blend them
Just-
up, but this is, yeah. you know,
Okay.
Do anything you like, do.
Okay. Okay.
No pressure.
We're talking about the distinguishing institutional racism and interpersonal prejudice. So the idea originated in American academia in the 1970s. That was a great decade, by the way. And is generally stated as the equation, racism equals prejudice and power, with the implication that only those who belong to the race which holds power are capable of being racist. Those people who occupy the majority of leadership roles in public institutions can exercise racist behavior. And in the 1970s, Richard Nixon was president, and he certainly is a prime example of that. Sense of prejudice plus power proponents assign the word racism strictly to the realm of power, institutions, social structures at large. Then we can speak individually about prejudice to describe the racist beliefs and behavior that are engaged by individuals.
So then our first student comments.
Well, I think that's really a fair statement. You sound like a racist yourself. I mean, why are we talking about this in a nutrition class?
And student number 2.
So this is based on your your background from the 1970s with Richard Nixon. That all went away when we kicked him out of office. I don't think you have any statistics or information to back that up.
And student number 3 says,
Look, I'm not paying good money for us to, should we be talking, I'm uncomfortable talking about this. Just tell me what I need to know to help me in my career. Tell me what I need to know that's going to be on the test. I really don't think this is relevant to what we should be discussing.
can everybody give them a round of applause, right? Right?
The teleprompter is really going crazy.
Well, I think part of it too is that we try to write a quick scenario, but do we have people that we've worked with, whether it's students in the classroom or people we've worked in the community or in committees, that these topics come up and we hear those type of reactions? I mean, has anybody heard those type of things before? Yeah. So part of this is, as we think through this, that some of you may have had this situation in your classroom or something similar. Yeah.
I think there are times too where, and I know I've had it, where there would be a certain topic and you have a student who's very adamant about it, and where you're kind of, trying to maybe change the scenario, go down a different path, the student's very adamant and keeps coming back to it, and then you have to figure out, now how am I going to, re-engage or disengage the student here, and then engage them in what we're really talking about, because sometimes you have students that are
Absolutely.
very aggressive in that
Absolutely,
area.
and I think this will help allow us to think through that. But the piece that we want to remember is that we may need to disengage in the moment, but we've got to process the experience. because it's not just the one person. Everybody has been impacted by the statements. And as we disengage because we need to move on, we need to assess, are we disengaging because we are uncomfortable talking about the topic? Should we take 10 minutes to have that learning, teaching moment that says, here's why we're going to talk about it briefly, but here's how we need to move back. Because if we disengage and leave it, what are the repercussions? And that's part of the process we have to think through on how we're going to manage it in the classroom or outside of, or both.
So this is where I want us to start thinking about these I statements, right? So I'll talk to you for a second about, give you some examples of I statements, but in the STAR approach, in order to engage in action, we need to be able to assess safety first. You have to look as a faculty member, or in any situation that you're in, you have to think about, can I address this situation right now? Or do I have to wait until later? That is always the first step, because there's always a chance, given those people that you have to work with, that this could really blow up and become something that you don't want it to be. And so you have to think about not just safety, physical safety, well, that is important too. A situation like this happened in our department, and it got real. But you need to think about the physical safety of the people around you. Is it going to become hostile? But you have to think about psychological, emotional safety. You have to think about that for the people who are in your classroom, because a hostile environment is not only a physically hostile environment, but it's also emotionally and psychologically, it's an emotional and psychological space as well. And so we have to make sure that we're safe. And that's where your discretion has to come in. Can I actually use this STAR approach in this situation? Or do I need to say something like, that didn't really go where I wanted it to go, right? And say, okay. And then perhaps start all over with your description of the definition of the race concept, and maybe at that point use a more authentic, and we'll talk about that with the SAFE approach, but use a more authentic teaching experience where you say, I'm going to go right to the data. I'm going to go to my textbook, and I'm going to go right to these pages here, and I'm going to say, you don't have to agree with what this is, but this is the information that we are presenting, and we're going to explore this as it is, and we'll approach something else differently. So if you can't use the STAR approach, then you have to use your knowledge at that point. You have to say, okay, that's not the exact energy that I wanted, but it's okay for you to have feelings, And so now let me pull this up so that we can go right to the data, and then go at it again. But here we go. Next, you want to address behavior. You want to try to focus the class and identify the problems, and you're definitely refusing to join the negative behavior. This is your task right here, you understand? Some of you, you received the email, you knew about what this presentation was going to, it's going to be an infusion of what Richie do and what I do. And first and foremost, the last thing that I want with anybody I'm communicating with ever is negativity. We just don't want it. We didn't come here for that. Like the student said, the last student said, I didn't pay for this, right? We're coming here to be educators. We're not coming here to have a bad day. And we can avoid that sometimes by just not joining in with the negative behavior. So you have to be the strong person in the room, the bigger person. Even if a student says something offensive or something disrespectful, or if they attack you, you have to step back, and you have to take the positive road. And this is really what is important about this STAR approach, is that you are in position to control the energy in the class. You have power. But if you resort to the negativity that is being introduced by the people who are in there, then you're not helping the situation become better. So, I statements. The key here is, the first is that you have to be very specific and direct. This means that you can't play around with the situation. You can't do things like the first student who said, you're a racist. I think you're actually being racist, yourself with how you're introducing.
But how can I be racist? I married someone who's Filipino.
Right.
We didn't say that from the beginning.
But here, the first thing that I want to say to you in an I statement is that I did not introduce this information to offend you or to downplay anything that relates to your experience or the experiences of people around you. Don't say, this information is not presented to be offensive to anybody. You have to use a direct statement. I did not present this in order to offend you or anyone else. You go directly to the problem and you address the problem immediately, specifically, and you let that person know right there, drop the ball, I didn't do this for this reason. You know, I did not present this material to insult you or anybody else, okay? And that's how you use I statements. And for some people, you know, you may think it may be difficult to go directly to a student and to say something, that it could cause problems, but it doesn't. It doesn't. It's more of a problem to make a general statement and then extend this racist comment to this comment about being racist to other students who may agree, who may have agreed with that. You know, you want to stop it right where it started so that anybody else who could have been in agreement with this student understands, okay, wait a minute. This is not where this faculty member came from. Whether they believe it or not, you use that I statement directly in order to try to solve that problem. Does that make sense for everybody? All right. Next, we want to avoid should-haves and could-haves. Sometimes we say things like, oh, this situation should not have been this way. It should have gone this way. Instead of students responding in such a way, what you should have said was blah, blah, blah. And I know a lot of times we say this because what should have is our vision of what should actually happen or what should occur. But the reality is that we have an organic classroom, a very alive moment. So all that we have to do at that moment is say, I provided a statement in the class, and that statement was based upon the information that is provided in the textbook, right? You go to the next student and you let that student know that for this particular student, this student said, let me get it together. This student, you say to them, I believe that it is okay to disagree, right? So you didn't agree with the definition. You didn't agree with what the professor had, introduced. It is okay. I believe that it is okay for you to disagree with the material introduced in the class. You don't have to believe in it. You take the information and you apply it in a way that is most effective to you. But I am not here to make you believe everything that is in the textbook. What can they say? What can they say? You have the right to think. You have a right to believe. But by me saying, right, I believe that it is okay. I'm telling you that it is all right for you to have an opinion, for you to have feelings in this classroom. But what our goal is to introduce the material and then to have a conversation and a dialogue about it in a setting that is peaceful. So even if you don't disagree, if you don't agree, it's perfectly fine. But let's find a space to talk about this respectfully, And that's how dialogue occurs. And maybe something interesting in the conversation will come about where there's something that actually conflicts with the definition that is introduced in the textbook. Then it is a moment where we've learned. But you use I believe. I believe it is okay. And you as a faculty member in there should be a certain realm of respect that you have anyway, because you're up there with the knowledge and you're providing that knowledge for those people anyway. But I believe that it is okay to disagree, right? I did not introduce this material to offend you, right? Or to be disrespectful to anyone, yeah? And I believe that it's okay for us to disagree. And then perhaps I think it's a good moment right now for us to revisit that definition. Let's look at it again and let's take a look at that textbook and let's explore that definition together as a team and then see where we can go with that. Does everybody understand where I'm coming from when I say use I statements? We want to, last but not least, avoid labels. I have seen this happen. I have seen faculty members refer to students as lazy, crazy, ignorant, not knowledgeable. I got a college degree. I got mine. You've got to go get yours. I have heard people say these things, but with your I statements, what you never want to do is label the people that you're communicating with, who are people, who are human beings, right? Just like you. And so when you talk about leveling the field and introducing power dynamics that help people to communicate with one another, you don't attack people by calling them names and by devaluing or degrading their experience. You don't want the students to do it to you, and you don't want to do that to the students. So that's where negative energy comes in, because the first thing that you might want to do is you might want to call somebody ignorant or illiterate or not knowledgeable because they attack something that you believe is based upon what you learned in the textbook. You may want to go to that because you become defensive because the energy is messed up in the classroom, and you want to try to change the energy, but you change the energy with negativity instead of using a more positive approach of looking and talking through what has occurred, trying to bring you back to where you started, you understand, and making sure that they understand that your energy wasn't, being directed at them. You weren't saying something to hurt them, but instead you're trying to deliver this information. Now, some of you may think it's common sense. Of course you're not going to introduce a comment to disrespect a student, like you have that to do, You're introducing the material because you want them to learn. But at the same time, sometimes the students, sometimes the people whom we're interacting with, they just don't understand that and they become offended. So you have to let them know, I did not present that material to create this type of effect or to take you to any place that is not a positive place. But I do understand that you don't agree with this, and that is okay. And I'm not going to call you names. I'm not going to devalue your knowledge or your position. We're going to get through this material, right, responsibly and respectfully. Do you think you could handle that? That's I statements and STAR.
A couple things that I'll add. One is going back to the behavior and environment. And so part of this is what you didn't intend, because last year I taught this and didn't get these questions, right? So it's like different people, different in the classroom. And so we need to be prepared for this. And one of the things is intent versus impact. In every situation, there's intent versus impact. I didn't intend this to happen, but it impacted students in a certain way. And so part of this is reflecting on that impact to say, how am I going to take the time? How am I going to take the I statements to say, that was not my intent, but I see the impact. So let's talk about this. Let's process this. Where are you coming from? Because a lot of times it's about language and semantics and words that we hear the same word, but we have different definitions. And so we start the conversation in two different points that doesn't lead to a good discussion. And so we have to bring people back. So the statement that the professor reads, when someone hears that, they hear racism, so they hear, I'm racist. Versus, what is the difference between individual prejudice and institutional racism? And sometimes we put them together, and sometimes they need to be together. But how do we have that conversation to say, do you understand the difference between these two before we get upset? Or are you upset because you think they're exactly the same thing? And so that becomes an example of that.
All right. So the next approach. These are 4 very specific approaches that can be used, and I think these approaches have been helpful for me during academic advisement. Academic advisement as it relates to helping students figure out what their journey is, where they want to go. Advisement for students as department chair. I receive, different notes and emails and complaints and different things from students who've had a problem. This has also been effective. I do some life coaching, and I work with adults and children who need to find their way. They need to identify their journey and figure out how they can be most successful. So the SAFE approach are 4 specific techniques, how you direct your energy and how you communicate with somebody in a given moment to get the end result that you want as the leader. So these are leadership models. So first, sincere here, we're talking about leading using sincere conversation. The second is authentic. This is about transformational or charismatic leadership. The 4th is fair leadership, and this is about leveling power and looking beyond your own view. For some of us, it's always about you. Always. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it's always about you because you're always right. You always know what the right thing is to do. And if you know this is who you are, then sometimes this fair approach, this may be one that you have to look to sometimes, because at the end of the day, to get to the end result, to get to a safe space with somebody to help them, it may not be about your vision. It may be about pulling their vision in and helping them to work through their own challenge. And the last is ethical, and that one is about you being a change agent. At some point, you're going to have a solution. You're going to have an idea. And you have to present that idea to someone who is in need of that because they've done something wrong. They've entered a point where there is a problem, and you need to help them identify a solution so that they can make something better. A lot of times we have students come in front of us and they have a serious problem where they've done something wrong, and you need to find a way to get them to change their behavior. So these are 4 approaches, and Richie, if you can take me back to there we go. We'll start off with SAFE. One thing that I need to talk to you about first with the sincere conversation is something called whole body communication. Whole body communication is so important. This means that there are points when you communicate with somebody using every piece of your body that exists. Your eyes, your head, your mouth, your smile, your hands, your body position, everything about how you use your body becomes important because this person needs to know that they have your full attention. I find sometimes that my cell phone is sitting on my desk and someone is talking to me and that thing is dinging, and my cell phone is connected to my watch that shows the text messages when it dings, so I can't help it. I went to a conference once and they said that there was like a disease or a disorder that came from the cell phone, where you heard the vibrate from the cell phone and automatically you couldn't pay attention because you had this disorder. I thought that was hilarious. I don't know if it's true or not, but I may in fact have that disorder. But so when I'm advising, I need to make sure that I'm utilizing this whole body communication and that I don't let the other distractors and different things around me stop me from giving this person my undivided attention. So you need to make sure that you know how to do that you get it. How do you stop and focus everything on this person so that they know that you care? So for some people, you understand sincere means paying attention. And so here you use whole body communication and you ask open-ended questions and you listen. That is very difficult for some of us to do, to listen, because we're so used to talking all the time. Listen. Yes.
We know that we're going to run over just a little bit because we're supposed to finish at 1. One thing before we go, we just want to let you know that the ideas that we present here, we know we can't go over as in detail as we want to. One of the things that I'll be offering our Stevens at Shepherd is I'm willing to do small groups for people to kind of talk through scenarios and how you might use this, because part of these techniques that we're talking about is actually practicing and using it. We can't get that today. So if you're interested, just send me an email afterwards and I'll find times for small groups to get together. I'm willing to do that over the next month or 2 to begin doing that process.
Do we have access to the slides also?
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's being recorded, so it'll be up on our FOSL page.
All right. So just very quickly, since these are the last 2 slides here, right? The authentic here, you want to basically use storytelling. At this point, you want to talk about personal experiences and experiences that relate to your discipline or your field of study to help a student understand what it is that is happening. So in this way, you become a charismatic leader and a role model in that you have experiences that relate. Some people, you can just tell them what to do, but if they can remember a story, sometimes that helps them connect to whatever it is. It connects them to you, and it also gives them something to remember so that in the future, when they get ready to make a decision, they can think through that story that you've provided and try to mimic that or model that. Your students respect you. They look to you as a role model, so if you give them an example that they can touch and that they can feel, sometimes it will help them through that journey. The next is fair. Here is the leveling power. This is where you ask them to hear their story and you let them explain and describe how their personal experiences have shaped their perspective. You do not talk about what you think. You do not talk about what you believe. You listen holistically to them, where they're coming from, and then you talk to them and you show them that you understand where they're coming from without infusing your own opinion. So you focus fully on their experience, on what they believe, and you pull the positives from it and help show them that you get where they're coming from. Keep in mind that these techniques can be used interchangeably. At one moment, you can use a sincere approach, and then you can then shift to the fair approach, you understand? But some people don't know to do this. You don't know that it's important to just let somebody talk through who they are, where they've come from, and how something makes sense to them. Sometimes they need to know that somebody understands them, somebody gets it, somebody knows why they are who they are, and that is valuable and that is important. And when I've been dealing with marginalized communities and marginalized students, this FAIR approach has been the #1 approach in terms of listening to their story and letting them know that they are valuable, they matter, they make sense. What they have to say is meaningful. And that may be the first time that a student ever has somebody listen to them and value what it is that they have to say. So it's a very meaningful approach to have in your toolbox. And then last is like a transactional perspective. It's ethical. You are giving your knowledge and your strength to that student, and you are telling them, this is what I would do. This is what I would do, and in fact, this is what you're going to do. You know, you're not going to be indirect with them. These are the 5 things that I need you to do tomorrow. Get out a sheet of paper, and I'm going to explain to you the reasons why you need to do this. Here's the data, here are the facts, here's how this makes sense. You go ahead and you do those things, you make those choices, and you come back to me and you report what it is that you've done so that we can work toward, you know, a positive end for you. So at that point, you become a leader, but a transactional leader, because you are asking for an exchange. You do this and you earn my respect. You do this and you earn the respect of the other people around you. You've made a mistake and now you have to solve this problem on your own. Here are the tasks that you have to solve, and this is why you need to do this. Do you understand? Now you repeat this back to me. You explain to me the 5 things that you're going to do and how you're going to do them, and you ask me questions about what you think you need to do in order to get this done. Are there any resources that I have where I can help you to solve these problems, because I want to see you be successful. I want you to win. And in order to win, here are the steps that I believe you need to take. Thanks. All right. That's it.
So the last thing we want to do before we wrap up is just to recognize, and this is kind of where Ann had brought the question up earlier, recognizing that acts of incivility come in all different forms, shapes, and sizes. And so we wanted to recognize some of the things, and these would be all forms of microaggression that we may see on our college campus. So symbols like the Confederate flag, swastika, calendars that objectify men and women. You know, I had that happen. I was a trainer at the University of Maryland, and the men, we were training the men in the physical plant, and they were like, well, there are no women here. Why should it matter if we have, you know, bikini-clad women laying on motorcycles in cars? And we had to have a long conversation about that. Downplaying individuals, you know, asking a person of color how she got her job, implying there's quotas or something like that. Targeting, so you don't sound Mexican. You know, what does that mean? Or I would never have guessed you were gay. So we're building on stereotypes. Environmental slights, asking, for example, an Asian American where they were born. They're born in Michigan. No, but where are you really from? You know, we see that all the time. And then jokes, any kind of jokes that are sexist, racist. And so these all occur inside the classroom and outside the classroom that allow people to feel less than. And so we have to think about what are the environments we're trying to create, because we need to recognize that while we have control in certain environments, we're all part of the bigger university. And so we want you to think through, when are you seeing and hearing these things that would make people on this campus uncomfortable? And are you having those conversations about the impact versus the intent of these behaviors, things like that. So we will hang around for questions, and again, just to let you know, I'm willing to set up some times for people who want to kind of think through and discuss this because we know we can't do this in 50 minutes, or actually an hour from us, I guess. So thank y'all very much for coming, and hopefully you take something away from the session.